MetaZoo Games just yesterday announced a massive update to their reserve list, which is a list of cards that they have sworn to never again reprint in a functionally identical form. And we are already starting to see the effects of this rippling through the marketplace. This is everything you need to know. Let's go. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Argos Anonymous. I am Argos. What an exciting topic today, a bit of a controversial one. The reserve list always gets people's blood going a little bit. The players tend to love it or not love it, or hate it or not care. The collectors tend to really like it, and the passionate parties on both sides go rah, rah, rah. But this isn't so much a conversation about whether or not a reserve list matters or is real or is not. No, this is just an update to the reserve list. MetaZoo nearly doubled the size of their reserve list yesterday, and we are already starting to see the implications of this rippling through the marketplace. But first, before we get too deep into this, I just want to make sure we're all on the same page understanding what a reserve list is. MetaZoo Games previously stated that one of their lofty goals for the brand is to become one of the most collectible brands in card games ever to exist. Having a reserve list is just one piece of that collectability pie. So a reserve list of cards is a list of cards that will never again be reprinted in a functionally identical form. For example, let's say there's a card called What Are the Odds? This is a spell. It costs 2 aura, 1 neutral, 1 light. And the card text says that you may contract this spell anytime a caster would roll a die. Instead of rolling that die, you may roll 3 die instead and choose any of the result from among those 3 dice rolls, and use that result instead as the effect of the original dice roll. What are the odds? Gosh, that would be a really good idea for a promo. If What Are the Odds was on a reserve list, MetaZoo could never again print a 1 neutral and 1 light casting cost spell with that specific effect, but they could print a beastie or an artifact with the same effect, or some other spell that has the same effect but a different aura cost. It really needs to be exactly functionally identical. The reserve list protects the function, not the name, not the color, not the art. The function. Collectors tend to like the idea of a reserve list, as over the years a plethora of reprints of a particular card can erode the perceived rarity and the perceived collectability of that card, and thus erode the value, and we have seen plenty of examples of this in other games. However, we have also seen examples where reprints of a card seem to have no effect on the original version, so the argument can be made both ways. At the end of the day, there is a body of collectors who like the reserve list and who will collect reserve list cards. Players tend to not like the idea of a reserve list, due to the perception, and probably reality at some point, that it can make these cards more difficult to obtain, which can make it more difficult to play the game. The reality is that it is very unlikely that a reserve list will make the game impossible to play, although it could limit access to some formats of play and certain deck builds. At the end of the day, managing a collectible card game is a balance between the game side and the collection side, and you really just need to walk the line throughout the entire lifespan of the game of trying to help the players and make the game accessible, but support collectors, because let's be honest, they're the ones that are probably spending more money on your game than most of the players. So you have to keep both sides happy as best you can. It'll never be perfect, you just do what you can. The popular trading card game Magic the Gathering has held true to their reserve list for decades, and has still managed to become one of the most played tabletop card games in the world. Now, Magic the Gathering has not been adding to their reserve list, whereas MetaZoo Games so far, until further notice, plans to periodically expand their reserve list as new sets are released, which is an interesting new idea, and we'll see how it works out. So far, it really hasn't made a lick of difference as far as accessibility is concerned, but we've really just barely begun. So let's dive into this reserve list update and talk about the 3 most important, in my opinion, additions to that list. Alright, this is the MetaZoo reserve list. This is on my website, argosanon.com. If you go to argosanon.com/MetaZoo reserve list, you'll find this. There's a link at the top of the site as well. It'll always have the most up-to-date version of the reserve list. In fact, let's put a link up here in the top of the YouTube video there if you want to print this off yourself or have this at home, you can get it from this site. So we already knew the Cryptonation base set card list. We had the Aurafax and we had the original base set Mothman. Now the last reprinting of the reserve list Mothman was in the Revive Cryptonation 2022 promo set. There are 7 versions of this reserve list, the original Mothman, which is probably a video in and of itself. I like to call them the Sacred 7, and it is a Mothman on the reserve list, which is pretty cool. But they didn't make any changes to the Cryptonation base set booster box. What they did do was add Nightfall. So now we have the Nightfall booster box set. We see that they added 5 cards. All of these are Aurafact essences. So interestingly, they are the 0 casting cost, like 0 contract cost Aurafacts that are dual Aurafacts, and that's it from Nightfall. They didn't add the Nightfall Mothman or Wendigo, anything like that, just these Aurafacts, which I thought was kind of interesting. Similarly, in Wilderness, they added all of the Aurafacts from Wilderness and the sigils, which I guess I didn't see that one coming, but they added Prism Aura. So this is the first of the 3 major updates to the reserve list. Prism Aura from Wilderness was added. This is an extremely playable card, an extremely important card, a very, very powerful card. Auras at this time are much more difficult to remove than artifacts. Prism Aura, you can fatigue it to generate an aura of any type. It was already an $80 card before this update, and we are already starting to see upticks on secondary markets of people buying into Prism Aura. These are some sold listings of Prism Auras on eBay that came through just today after the reserve list was announced. You can see a PSA 10 sold for $200. Somebody made a deal. Oh, that was me. I offered this guy $65 and he took it, like as soon as they made the announcement. So hopefully they don't cancel that. If you're that seller and you're watching this, thank you, sir. I appreciate you. I will take very good care of that Prism Aura. Please send me the Prism Aura. Please don't cancel the sale. Somebody else made a deal on an $80 one. See, people are making deals. This is pretty good. So as you can see, there was a bit of a scramble to pick up some Prism Auras as soon as this was announced. That said, it's such a popular card, frankly, there aren't a whole lot on the market. Let's go to TCG Player. Hopping over to TCG Player, you can see these cards are already sitting at $85 to $100, and there really isn't a lot of volume. I mean, there's only 6 cards until it's up into the 90s. We did not see a significant spike in buying so far, at least that is showing up on the sales data in TCG Player, but the cards are already so highly priced. I don't know. The bottom line is this, though. When you look at, people have asked me, so is Prism Aura going to skyrocket because it's on the reserve list? Well, here's the problem. Wilderness is everywhere. There's plenty of discounted Wilderness product all over the place, and Prism Aura is just sitting in those boxes. So although it is a valuable card, and I think people will start to buy into it more heavily now that it is officially on the reserve list, especially because it's so darn playable, there's so much Wilderness out there. On some places it's on a fire sale, that that's going to limit any gain in Prism Aura until that Wilderness product can dry up, because the more valuable Prism Aura becomes, the more it will drive opening of Wilderness product in order to break it down and sell the Prism Auras, right? And then that'll contribute to a population of Prism Auras in the market, and that'll decrease the price. And that sort of homeostasis is going to drive forward until the volume of Wilderness product can kind of dry up. Moving on! Now we have the UFO box. Once again, they added all of the dual essence Aurafacts, the dual Aurafacts, which is really interesting again. But then they threw the orbs in there, which I guess is sort of like the sigils from Wilderness, fine, whatever, and Neutrality, Totality Aura. So similar to Prism Aura, Neutrality, Totality Aura, it's an aura that generates 2 of a neutral aura, which is great. It's just anyone can use it as easy ramping. So it's a very, very powerful, very playable card. Again, though, UFO is, all over the place. And so any gain in Neutrality, Totality Aura that results from it being included on the reserve list is going to be met with increased opening of the UFO product. And it's still on the shelves. It's still basically in standard per se. So I personally think that although these reserve list inclusions will have an effect at some point, it won't have an effect really until a set has started to dry up on secondary market and the price of the sealed product starts to go up. That's when these auras can start to go up in value. They also added Wilderness and UFO tribal deck leaders or champions or hollows, whatever you want to call it. But importantly, included within some of the tribal decks for Nightfall and Wilderness is a card called New Beginnings, which is a powerful card draw card that players will know about. This was snuck onto the reserve list in the tribal deck promos area. So this being such a playable card, you're going to want to get your hands on these, though. Again, there are plenty of Nightfall and Wilderness tribal decks sitting around all over the place, and these cards are just sitting in it. So even though it's on the reserve list, I don't expect any really significant uptake in the value, though it could drive additional opening of these Wilderness tribal decks. Release deck promos, similar story. You have release deck promos, you have New Beginnings, once again is listed in those release deck promos, and they just added Wilderness and UFO to the laundry list. Blister pack promos, they just added Wilderness Cumberland Dragon. They didn't add the UFO cards, I assume, because the UFO blister pack promos were actually just alternate art versions of cards in the UFO set, and they didn't want to add those 4 random cards from the UFO set onto the reserve list, at least not at this time. For Walmart promos, we have both the Piazza Bird and the Dragon of Akanto Falls promo are on the reserve list, and they added Green Man and the tickets from Wilderness onto the reserve list as well, to join the likes of Secret Rares, Red Ink, Blue Ink, and Old Scratch. Now this was interesting. So Hero Quest has been immensely popular, and something that actually surprised me, I expected pretty much all of the other stuff except New Beginnings. I mean, I could see it. Who knows when it would happen, but it had to happen someday. This one surprised me. They added almost all, or maybe all, of the new cards, like the new playable unique cards that are available in the Hero Quest Genesis set. Almost all of them were added to the reserve list. So look at that. So Hero Quest Genesis has a host of reserve list cards, which is very interesting because we know they're going to continue the Hero Quest line of cards, and a massive chunk of the base set of Hero Quest can now never be reprinted again. So that caught me by surprise. All the Rudy promos are on there because Rudy is Rudy, massive reserve list proponent, so it makes sense that all of his stuff is on there. And then we have miscellaneous sets like some holidays and Debrews and the NFT tokens and the What's Your Passion jewelry promos. That's kind of interesting. Whatever, they're on there. And then miscellaneous promos. Of the miscellaneous promos, the one I want to just bring to your attention, 2nd anniversary celebration. The other interesting one is the Unrefined Chaos Crystal from Revive and Magicast. These are cards that are very popular to pull in Magicast and in the Revive series. It was one of the Revive Cryptonation base set rares, so there are only some say 50, I say 66 of the redeemable and 66 of the non-redeemable Unrefined Chaos Crystal Revive promos, and they are now reserve lists. So that could boost them up, I suppose, knowing that that's all you're ever going to see of those. Again, we're looking at things that cost 0. We're looking at cards that cost 0. We're looking at neutral casting costs, very low cost cards with significant draw power or significant like counterspell ability, stuff like that. Basically just very, very, very generally usable, very powerful cards and 0 cost cards are making their way onto the reserve list. And then situational promos, which makes sense, and then theme cards like the theme deck and the release deck champions. Looking at this update, I can't help but think to myself, I'm pretty sure I just mailed out like 50 2nd anniversary celebrations to people who pre-ordered Seance for me as little inclusions. You know, I like to include promos like Hero Quest and 2nd anniversary celebrations and LGS promos and Magicast and Chibis and like all kinds of stuff. And I sent out a ton of those. So congratulations if you got those. That's all I've got for now. Thank you, MetaFam, for stopping by. As always, I do appreciate this opportunity to entertain you fine peoples of MetaZoo. Have a fantastic week. This is Argos, signing out.